Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Steps to Soul podcast. I'm Brandon Bourgeois, my co-host Chris Sater. Let's dive into this week's episode.
Let's do it.
This week, we're going to talk about how to find the right business to buy and the key criteria for evaluating that business. That might seem simple, Chris, but there's a lot of factors that go into play, and especially for a person just starting that adventure, interested in it or curious, there's a lot of things to take note here. And there's a lot of things that you're going to do to, one, protect yourself, help maximize your return on looking for a business, and then finding the right one. And I think those are all very different concepts that people don't realize intertwine importantly to get a deal done. You know, if you're serious about buying a business, how do you know which one truly has red flags for you and which opportunity is worth going after? And I think often people call us with these visions of grandeur, or they've overanalyzed the market, or they've seen some influencer give some tips like buy a boring business. Look,
Right.
there's 100 ways we can go down that road.
Yeah.
But today we're going to talk about some great options. For everybody listening, we're going to talk about how to define your goals, what to look for in good listings, key evaluation criteria, how to make smart decisions with that criteria, the common mistakes people make, and then the proper questions to ask. And if you cover all those 5 topics we just spoke on that I highlighted, you're going to be where you want to be at the start of your process and hopefully at the end of your process too. But diving right in, I think the hardest part most people need to realize is define what the right fit for you is. And I think so often people look at deals out there and think that would be great. I would love to own this business. I would love to own a mini storage, a laundromat, an absentee owner business, right? How often do we hear those buzzwords in emails and, phone calls of buyers calling us, especially first-time buyers?
Yeah.
And the first thing I'd always say, Chris, and I ask people, what is your financial goals and how much do you want to be involved? Because if you're looking for the unicorn of 100% absentee ownership making multi-six figures, that's not going to be available. We'll cover that later under common mistakes. But, what is your financial goal? Do you have a W-2 you want to leave? Do you need a business that makes X amount to support your lifestyle? And what is it going to take to buy a business that does that? And I think people have not always thought that process through, from looking for one to purchasing one, and most often financing one. So I'll let you take off on this topic here, and then I'll kind of jump in with you. As how do you think a buyer should really, first off, define their financial goals? What is, I think, a safe parameter to start with? What do you think was a good way to kind of, if someone were to call you today and say, Chris, I want to buy a business, I've got X amount in cash, what should I look for? Take the lead.
Yeah, I think one of the questions I always ask, especially first-time buyers, is what's your debt tolerance, your risk tolerance? How much are you willing to go in debt? Yeah, I know how much you've got to invest, so I can tell you kind of what your maximum range is. But if you've got $500,000 that you're willing to invest, yes, technically you could go get a SBA loan, max loan for $5 million. But are you willing to risk having a $5 million loan on your back for the next 10 years? I know a lot of people I talk to are, until the wife gets involved, right?
I was going to say, wait till the wife. I mean, we've had these discussions with our spouses, right? How well does that go?
Yeah, that really factors into, what age you are. If you're 30, yeah, maybe it's a risk worth taking. I don't know if age plays so much, but it does in my life. So, when I look at deals, whether I want to have 10 years of SBA debt on my plate, that plays a big factor in what I look at as a buyer. But for first-time buyers, the biggest mistake I see is when somebody gets emotionally attached to the business before they've even evaluated whether it fits their long-term goals. And I know we're going to talk a lot about that in this episode of how you prevent that from knowing what to look for before you even make an offer. That's really what I want to kind of alert people to do, is before you make that offer, make sure it fits with what your goals are.
Absolutely. And my dad fought the same issue when he opened this operation. He had looked at other deals out there and people were like, well, your money down, you've got to buy these multi-million-dollar deals. My dad's like, I'm not going to debt at 55 years old. I don't need to do that. And I think so many people, they see the rules, what is your, you can put no money down, right? We talked about SBA influencers speaking that mumbo jumbo. And you see people calling, looking to buy $3-4 million businesses, putting no money down. If you've only got $100,000 to your name, you're beyond maxed out. That's not realistic, and it's not going to happen. And if you're going to rely on other outside capital, Have you actually thought about how to get that capital? Or are you just hoping that your great uncle is going to give you $500,000 to put as a down payment?
Yeah.
There's a ton of factors that I don't think people have run through and really done some real financial risk tolerance. Like you mentioned, the spouses. Hey, are you okay with the SBA putting a note on your house? Are you okay with spending all your savings? Can you afford to send your kids to school? Pay car insurance in the meantime if you quit your W-2. And I think they fall in love with the idea of business ownership, but they never thought through the risk and the financial commitment to even get started. And I also think the biggest issue most buyers face is in setting the precedent what they want to do. Does it align with your background? There's nothing wrong with trying and moving into a new industry in life and learning a new skill set. We did doing these jobs, right?
Yeah.
But are you really going to take out a $4 million SBA note for a business you know nothing about, have never run or even been in? That's not realistic. And also, the banks aren't going to probably loan it to you. Now, if you're a seasoned business executive, you own 4 or 5 businesses, you've got a little more runway to work with. But I have people call all the time, well, I want to own a restaurant. Okay, have you ever owned a restaurant? No, but I can get SBA financing. Okay, well, we talked about this in previous episodes. They're going to want to check your background out. And honestly, I would not feel comfortable showing you a restaurant that you can't run, right? That's setting yourself up for failure. Some industries you need to have extremely good background and knowledge in to be successful in. Very rarely does someone just jump in the restaurant business and make it, right? How many times do you see that on TV? Episodes, bar failure, restaurant, save my restaurant. A dime a dozen.
Yeah.
So to highlight back risk tolerance, how much financial, capacity you have to perform, and then understanding your background and what works for you. Are you going to want to work full time? If you want to work full time and own a business, do you want to work 60 hours a week? Because your 40-hour-a-week job is going to have 20 hours work after it, taking care of books, payroll. I mean, we go down the list, right? We've owned businesses. It's a lot of extra work, no matter how absentee you want to be. And I would say before we move on to the next topic, is create yourself a buyer profile, right, Chris? Nothing helps a broker or other people better is to see that you've kind of lined out what your target goals to acquire are, what industries, your background, a quick bio, and have that information ready when you start your search. And we're going to talk more about that next week with our special guest, George Welmer, on what good buyers do differently to stand out. And George is going to bring some expertise from his side of the industry. We'll have our, so if you're listening, check in next week as well, especially this is going to be good if you're a buyer. But say you've kind of got the initial process of you've done some risk tolerance thinking, you've done some financial background on your assets. Hey, I have X liquidity. Let's talk about the key criteria to evaluate a business. First off is financial health, right, Chris? How many times have we said it? Find a business with good books, right? How much easier is it when a business has reported income you can take to an SBA lender? And more importantly, if you're out there, look for listings that have been pre-qualified for SBA. That means a banker has already looked at the books. He's comfortable. He has a range he knows he can work with. And if your background and financial tolerance match that, you're going to save yourself time, effort, and hopefully get the deal done that you want to get done. Besides that, I would say too, look at low customer concentration. Look for items that you maybe wouldn't think about early on in the early process when you're looking to buy a business. Don't just look, like I said, don't fall in love with the idea of owning this mini storage. Okay, well, let's talk about this. What if that mini storage is rented out by one big company for 40% of the revenue, down maybe like a small fishing town like in South Louisiana, where Exxon rents out half the units a year for their clients, and half the year they're gone. Well, are you sure you want to buy that business going out of season? There's 100 things you can talk about when it comes to the financials and having the tax returns ready. But I'll let you talk a little more on operational fit, Chris. I think you've had some good deals lately, especially one with like a utility contractor, for example, I know of, where did that buyer fit the business model and what he wanted to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think creating, you mentioned the buyer profile. I think creating a buyer profile, it might sound basic, but it's absolutely foundational in your search to find the right business. You need to understand, are you looking for that business that throws off $150,000 in SDE with minimal staff? Or do you want something that you can grow aggressively, even if it means long hours for you, a reinvestment for a few years? Maybe you're not even taking a salary for a few years. You've got to understand what you're looking for before you go out in the marketplace. Otherwise, there's so many businesses out there that are listed for sale, right? If you don't
Yes.
understand what you're looking for in the first place, you're going to spend all your time just going from deal to deal to deal, and you're never going to have an idea of what you really want. So if you're a corporate executive used to managing teams, a small business owner operator business, that may drive you insane. The clarity that you will get from filling out a buyer profile will filter those opportunities So you'll
Mm-hmm.
be able to look at the good opportunities that work for you faster with confidence, and you'll be able to move on them quickly when you identify one that works.
I agree. And I think that leads to our next point is transferability. You know, is that business dependent upon an owner having a specialty license or skill set? Everybody wants to get into the trade business right now, right? Service business, HVAC, plumbing, electrical. You don't have any business buying a company like that if you don't have a background in that industry, most likely. Maybe you're a great seasoned executive, you can run a company, but if you don't have the people in place to do that for you already on staff, you're barking up the wrong creek. You're not going to get it done. And I think too many people just don't think that portion through, or they just assume that everything's just going to be easily handed to them when they transfer, and that's not the case. You're often buying a job, or you're at least buying a lot of work, right? Maybe not a job per se, a W-2, but you're buying a lot of work. If you don't have those skills or you're not prepared, that's be realistic with yourself. We talked about that in the first portion. Know what you want to do. If you're like, here's a great example, good anecdotal story for you. We had a lady who had been a principal in the school system here in the region. She wanted to get into the daycare business. And we told her, look, you've obviously got the educational background. You've got great credentials, but you're not going to qualify to be a director of a daycare yet. Well, how dare you tell me? Ma'am, it's not that. The state is very strict on how you get a director's license. You have to work so many hours in a daycare. Now, can they supplement some of the background accreditation from your education background? Absolutely. But they're not just going to give you a director's license if you've never one day worked in a daycare, right, Chris? They're not going to do it. And we were told, oh, no, I'm going to get it done. All of a sudden, you're right. So now I got to keep a director on staff, pay a little more money, hurts the cash flow short term till I get my license. They're doing fine now. But even then, that person had not thought that through. And we tried to advise them, hey, you can get one eventually, yes, but you can't get it tomorrow. On the opposite side, we had a young lady, was a teacher, wanted to own her own daycare, couldn't afford a big one. She said, you know what? She quit her job as a teacher. You know what she did, Chris?
What's that?
She started working at a daycare.
There you go.
And got that experience, and then got her director's license. And then she
Right.
called us, and it was, what it was? I'm ready to buy daycare. I'm qualified. I've got my licensing in place. I've got industry experience. And that SBA loan was super easy to get for her. She checked every box. She had done it the right way. That's knowing what you want to do, taking the first steps we talked about, then working with a good broker to find the right business in your market, and being able to execute at a very high level and transfer straight in, no issues. So to be the owner operator, maintain all the cash flow to themselves, maximize their return. That's how you do it. Now, that's not ideal for everybody, but that's how you do it if you think it through, or at least a couple years in advance if you have time.
Yeah. That operational fit, that can be a deal breaker, right? If you're buying
Absolutely.
if you're buying a commercial HVAC company and you don't have that license or even the
Mm-hmm.
qualified technician or staff,
Mm-hmm.
what's worse than not even being able to buy the business, you might be violating state law the day you take over. And same thing goes for franchises. We didn't even talk about that. You got to know what those franchises require,
Mm-hmm.
and you got to go through that. You can't just reach out to the franchise and buy a franchise. You got to go through the franchise. So, you need to know what the roles of the owner is today as well. If they're the salesperson, if they're the manager or the technician, you
Mm-hmm.
either got to be ready to wear that hat, or you need to have a plan in place before you even go in looking at that business. Take a look at it, find out what the owner does, but that should be your first thing: is how do I make this fit in an operation standpoint?
That's exactly correct. And that's why we see companies that have those key managers in place get the bigger multiples, because you're not having to take on that risk directly. And I think people don't always realize that. We talk about risk factors, key employees, almost to a point where it's a detriment that only one employee has a master, say, plumber license or electrical or HVAC license. Heavy reliance on vendors. We talked about that. I think often overlooking legal issues, when you first start the process, especially for a lot of companies with, let's say, a fleet of vehicles. It's important to make sure there's no pending lawsuits or lawsuits that you could see coming. Like, hey, my guy, I'm looking at, let's say, a mobile waste company. The guy had 4 wrecks last year. Well, if I'm doing a stock sale, I need to think about, what if a lawsuit pops up, right? Do I want to inherit that liability? All kinds of issues like that you have to just think long-term. Think as if you're in the business owner's chair, what the risk factors could be coming from different directions, and have those questions ready. Being prepared when you have those questions ready, when you go to that first meeting, awesome. That's how you get owners to fall in love with you and trust you.
Yeah.
So that leads
Very
into the
important.
next section. questions to ask during initial evaluation, right? Kind of led us right into that. You know, I think the most famous question everybody asks when they inquire, and I'll let you guess, but I think you know the answer. What is it?
Why are you selling?
Exactly right. Why does the owner sell? There's 1,000 reasons. That's the key one to ask. If they can't give you a good reason, they're probably not ready to sell, right? Or they're not telling you the real reason why it's selling, which is probably a red flag. I think the most important thing the next ask would be, what does day and the owner look like? What are some challenges you're facing right now or you foresee coming? That business owner if they've been running the business for a while, they know the industry pretty well. They know where the lacks, where the pros, the cons, the threats, the non-threats. Ask them those questions. And if they can't give you answers, then they're not very dialed in, and you should be concerned how the business is structured. What else do you see as a constant? Well, maybe a key question you would like to see people ask more often, besides I guess the ones we always assume people know already.
Yeah, I mean, I want to go back to you got to know what the owner does, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to say this: some businesses are not really for sale; they're listed, but if they're just an extension of the owner, so in other words, if every customer knows Joe's name, and the minute
Mm-hmm.
Joe leaves, and all the goodwill walks right out the door with him, that business isn't really for sale. It can't be bought because everything is tied to Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're willing to keep Joe on full time, I don't know really why Joe's selling. But the more systematized a business is, the easier it is to transfer. That's what we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about, right? The transferability of the business.
Yes.
So for a buyer, for first time buyers especially, I think you got to ask for written procedures. You need to see staff structure, customer contracts, or long term relationships. How are all those
Mm-hmm.
set up? How are they installed in the business? And always check for those licenses, like we're talking about, because some of them can't be legally transferred without having that experience. So yeah, understand what the owner does. Very important.
Absolutely. And I think we always tell people to, ask who the key employees are and what their roles are. You're not going to get on your first call, you're not going to get every single due diligence question answered. And I want to stress that to people. Don't go in with a 500-page checklist asking about minute, tiny details. The initial questions need to be about basic operating structure, the few key employees, and like you mentioned, systems. How does the business organizationally function? Because once you understand that, then you can start looking for other red flags or lack of red flags to say, okay, now that I understand how the business works, do I see myself sitting in this chair, right? Do I see myself running the operation? Do I like how this flows? Or, you know what? I'm a great administrator. I can handle that. Or buyer B, I'm a bad administrator. I'm a good salesman. If the owner's administrating, does he have a GM? Does he have somebody that handles all the payroll, the paperwork, all that nonsense? And I can focus on leading the sales team and going out there and growing the business, like you talked about, finding ways to scale the business. That's where my expertise is. Identify, like we talked about, your strengths, then find out the organizational structure of the business and take that and then start diagnosing what issues and fits and non-fits for you. And I think that's something too many owners, too many buyers come into the table. What's it for sale? Why do they sell a good business? You're asking the wrong questions. Yes, it's okay to ask why it's for sale, but don't get hung up on why they're selling. Get hung up on, okay, now that I have a reason why it's selling, whatever that reason may be, does this fit me? Versus, oh my God, why would they sell this? What's going on? Like, don't let that steer your concentration. Get the basic questions answered right. And if you get those right, then you can make an actual informed decision about yes, no, find another one. And that kind of leads us to our next point, common mistakes to avoid. We talked about, you know, chasing dreams. I think the biggest thing I want to say is do not chase cash flow. Nothing is going to ruin your opportunities than chasing a business where you click on every listing for sale that has, let's say your metric is 300 cash flow, right, Chris? How many buyers do we see click on everything for sale for 300 cash flow?
I don't have time to tell you.
No, it's a lot, and it's not good for you as a buyer. Because if you're just clicking on everything with cash flow, what you're telling everybody is, I'm not serious. You might think you're serious, but you're not. Because no one wants to be in HVAC, to restaurants, to glass. That's not realistic. And that's not realistic. You're just wasting time and you're daydreaming. And so many buyers come in here and do that. We work on commission. There are brokers charge upfront fees. I don't agree with that. That's another discussion another day. But if you're clicking on 10 listings, you're not very serious. Now, like we talked about, you develop a buyer profile, you message the broker, develop a relationship early on. Say, hey, look, I'm looking for something between SDE of X to X. I'd love these industries, but if you think something might fit my background, let me know. That's how you do it. Don't send a mass email out to every single broker in the country saying, I'm a private equity firm when you're a one-man shop looking for every trade business and $750,000 SDE. That's not realistic. You're not moving across the country. Let's be honest. Your wife and kids are not ready to move just because you got a pipeline dream that you haven't shared with them yet. I mean, how many buyers do you get? Let me rephrase that question. How many people that ever sent you that email have ever worked out, Chris?
How many, if any?
Same here. None that I know of. Maybe they found a deal without us knowing, but I've never had one tell me they did. The only one I ever did was a good guy we showed a specialty niche manufacturing and microchip business to here in the state. He found a lawn care company in Texas, but he wanted to stay in the agricultural background. He had narrowed his field down. He was very specific and he moved quick. Didn't work out with us, but he found the right fit for him. But 90% of those guys, they don't buy. They're living a pipe dream. And also, they don't want to leave their W-2. So that's another discussion. I would also say, tell us a little more about kind of trying to skip the due diligence process, Chris. How many times do you see a buyer that comes in and really wants to kind of just jump to the LOI and offer phase and rush through it and ask due diligence or not even do proper due diligence? I mean, I know we've had a couple of deals recently where people they're bouncing around. It's like, man, you got to stay on the tracks if you actually want to do it correctly.
Yeah. And why did they let that happen? It's because their emotions have clouded their judgment. I've seen buyers skip the whole due diligence because the company just felt right or the vibe felt right. They just felt like they wanted to hurry up and get to the end. And what they end up with is a nightmare on their hands because they didn't do a very crucial part of the process. You've got to treat buying a business just like you would buying a house. You don't just walk through the kitchen and say sold. There's a process. You get the inspections, you get the appraisals, you get a second opinion if needed. And I would say if somebody won't provide you all the financials that you are asking for during due diligence, you should walk away immediately. There is no serious seller
Absolutely.
that won't provide you with every shred of detail on their business and financials.
Absolutely. And I think the opposite can be said for, we have some sellers that provide everything in a super timely manner, and buyers get hung up on tiny little expenses, tiny little things that sometimes you just can't go back and verify. You lost the receipt or just items that aren't going to make a dang good difference, right? But they got to prove it. They got to get their way. And I would tell a buyer out there, no business books are going to be perfect. Get that out of your head. Don't expect it and don't demand it. That being said, be understanding, because a lot of times owners want to save on taxes or just make a mistake, or their bookkeeper made an honest error. It doesn't mean they're trying to cheat you. And I think buyers often fall in so much of the extremes either or, and don't just kind of, having not done it before, understand how business books really do look. And I hope if you're listening out there, you take that to heart, because every business is going to have a P&L with probably the wrong number in the wrong section, or let's say a charge from the wrong year move from December 24 to January of 25. Don't panic on that. That being said, if it's a lot of money and it changes the P&L net, yeah, you have questions to ask, but don't breeze by it and don't hyper focus on it. I talked about the unicorn earlier too, about mistakes. How often do we see, I want in my buyer profile, $300,000 cash flow, fully absentee owner, for sale for just 2 times the cash flow? I'll tell you this, everybody out there, and Chris, if I'm wrong, you cut me off here. If that exists, I'm going to buy it. You're not going to get it because I'm going to see it first.
All right.
Full disclaimer, don't be mad. They don't exist. If they did exist, we would never let you know. I promise, because we would buy it ourselves and be very happy to retire with them. And I talked about cash flow chasing too. I mentioned that, but I want to go back to cash flow chasing one more time because I want to stress this to everybody. Cash flow is not everything. Cash flow is important. It can help service debt. It gives you a standard of living. But cash flow is not always going to be perfect. And if you come in there wanting to tear everything about cash flow to shreds and renegotiate and flip the multiple, and you're stuck on the multiple, and I'll get to that too, where yes, a business might sell traditionally in that price range for a 2.5 times multiple. Maybe the owner wants a 3. Is it worth you to have this perfect fit for a 3 to you as a buyer? It may be. And it may be this owner has a really, really, really good setup. Look at the lawn care deal we did, Chris. It sold for a pretty high multiple for its size, but it had outstanding systems in place, procedures in place, a GM in place, consistent historical revenue, different profit centers coming in from doing Christmas lights, lawn care, commercial, residential. It checked every box. So that owner pushed for the highest price possible, but it was worth it, in my opinion.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely. Yeah, I would agree with you that, also you can't chase just cash flow, because you've got to look at what skills are you bringing to the table. That cash flow may disappear if you're not bringing the right skills to replace that owner that I talked about, or you just don't know what you're doing. So you come into this business that's got $300,000 of SDE, but if it's the wrong business for you, what's going to happen to that cash flow when you
mhm.
can't handle the things the way the owner did who ran the business for 20 years? That's why it's so important to get that buyer profile and make sure you're going after businesses that you can really actually serve and do a great job at.
I agree. I'd even add too, I think you can touch on this as well. Understanding what kind of sale you want to do, a stock versus an asset sale, and what goes with that. Clarifying that if you want working capital included, get that figured out early on. Talk to the broker, see if that's even factored into an asset sale or the stock sale. Things like that you should just be asking early. Don't just assume you're getting it because that's the way the market works. A lot of the stories people read are for much, much bigger transactions than the one they're actually going to be purchasing. And the way those deals are structured is very different than the deals being structured at a lower level. And I think people sometimes get way too caught up, especially new buyers, and well, that's market. I've read about this. I took this class, and so and so said I have to have this. Well, you know what the owner's going to tell you? Get your own working capital, asshole. Excuse my language out there. Hey, I worked hard for this cash. I'm not just giving you all my working capital and cash in the bank just because you want it. I earned this. And when you're in their shoes, I bet you'll feel very similar. So know what kind of sale you want to do and how that also might affect the price and the value you're willing to pay. If you're not sure, at least it's to our next portion. You know, talk to a business broker like us. Talk to an advisor. Learn the good things and the good tricks to be aware of. So when you start the process, we can help you make the best decision possible. Now, it leads me to one point I want to tie back from mistakes of working with us. If you're not willing to sign a non disclosure agreement and you're not willing to fill out a financial form, you're not going to get anything done. The owner doesn't need you. If you can't show capacity to perform, you don't need to see a deal. And you're not mature enough to do a deal. Let's make that clear right now, right, Chris?
Absolutely.
Would you go ask a realtor to show you a $4 million house if you can't afford to buy it?
Yeah,
Probably
they're
not.
yeah, they're going to want to see that pre-qualification letter, right?
That's correct. And we can help you with getting pre-qualified with an SBA lender. We can look at your financial form. Now, we're not asking for bank account numbers, but give us some base information to say, okay, yeah, you can fit. And a good broker can underwrite a lot of good deals just looking at that information and knowing the cash flow available. And we specialize in that. And that's why you should want our help, because very often buyers don't realize how much room they actually have to work in with creative financing and creative deal structure to get a deal done. So when you talk to us, let us help you with that process. Is there anything you want to add there that we bring of value that I think I either didn't touch on or just kind of glossed over real quickly?
Yeah, I think working with a good broker to find the right business, what we do more than just get listings out there, right? We can filter opportunities for buyers, help them
Mm-hmm.
guide them through the valuation nuances, because we deal with it all day, every day. And those can help avoid costly mistakes down the
Yes.
road, right? We know what's fair, what's a red flag, how to structure the deal properly. So asking all those questions up front before you really dive deep into a deal negotiation, those are important things that a broker can help you with.
No, absolutely. And sorry for my phone going off. It's been a busy morning already, as you can hear. But I would tell people by having that conversation with a broker early in your journey, they're going to give you a lot of good pointers at the ones we've already mentioned here, but also make sure you're ready to make that journey. Because one, we're not going to invest our time and energy into somebody who's daydreaming and doesn't really want to help do the right process. But two, by following our process and letting us help you, and you can do your own process if you want. We're not saying you have to do it our way. But if you follow the basic guidelines correctly, when you do find the right business you want to buy and you meet with the right seller, you're going to come across a lot more prepared, and that seller's going to have more confidence in doing a deal with you, especially if you're going to want seller financing or seller financing on the back end of an SBA note, or keep them on as let's say, a partner, employee for a while. Being prepared and first impressions matter. Just like you would if you're going to ask your girl on a date or go buy a house. First impressions matter. It matters in buying a business. It's not all about getting the best deal. Yes, you want the best deal for you, but if you don't come across appropriately when starting the process, the faith that seller is going to have in you to do a deal is going to be a lot lower and make it a lot harder to negotiate when you maybe find an issue or need some wiggle room or need a vote of confidence. I see that too often.
Yeah.
So I guess in my final takeaway, and I'll let you add some points here as well. One, find the right business for your lifestyle. Don't just chase revenue. Look for the right transferability, the right fit for you, and get with an expert early on. Is there anything else I think I'm missing besides watering that down, or at least speaking to us? If I'm missing anything, Chris, add to it because we want you to be prepared out there.
No, just remember you're not just buying a business, right? You're buying what you're going to be doing in the future. So
Well
you said
said.
it exactly. Make sure it's one that aligns with three things: your skills, your lifestyle, and your goals. Make sure that everything's coming together, and make sure when you're looking for businesses, you've got that in mind. You said it exactly right. The cash flow chasers, guy from Idaho looking at an HVAC business in Shreveport, Louisiana. How's that working? I don't see it working most days. And
Mm-hmm.
but they're out there sending these listing. They're inquiring on Biz Buy Sell or whatever Sunbelt Network, and it's just crazy when they come in. It's like as a broker, I see it all the time, and they're just not going to align for the most
Mm-hmm.
part. Now, I'm not saying I haven't had it happen once in a while, but 99, in fact, 999 out of 1,000
Mm-hmm.
times, it doesn't work out.
You're not wrong. And how many two-man equity groups that claim to be equity groups email us and they don't even have their funding lined up? Well, yeah, we have committed capital from someone. Okay, do you show it to us? Well, once we get the deal, then we can bring it to them. That's not committed capital. That's a pipe dream. And there's nothing against that process if it works for you. Let me say that you can get it done. But when you're asking someone about a two, three, even $1 million business, and you don't have any committed capital up front, most owners are going to say, please don't waste my time. Broker, why'd you bring him into the table? Right? I'm glad he seems like a great guy, but that's not really a fit for us right now. If he
Yep.
has to go interview me, then go beg his partners for money, why are we wasting times committing to an LOI, committing to an offer to tie me down that really you can't execute on right now? Even if we started the process right now, we couldn't execute on. You're holding yourself back, and once you burn a broker doing that one time, that broker is going to be extremely reluctant to ever work with you. And look, we do talk. We notice the trends in the industry and bad issues. We want to help all buyers find a good business, but we also know the red flags. And as a buyer, what we just gave you today is excellent, excellent, good free advice, and take it to heart. And if you have questions from Chris, myself, or anybody on our teams, give us a call and start that call. We would love nothing more for you to call us today and let us help you get started and give you some guidance. Because if we can help you prepare for that moment when it does come, you're going to be able to execute so much better. And we want you to execute fine. Even if it's not with the deal not with us, right, Chris? I'd much rather somebody make a good deal happen for them than go out there and burn a seller or burn the market up, making bad mistakes.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's free advice. Happy to help a buyer find the right business, like you said, even if it's not one of my listings. I like putting buyers in good situations where they're making
Mm-hmm.
good deals happen. It's going to benefit one of our colleagues, another broker. That's great. That's what this business is all about. It's all about helping sellers, helping buyers, and putting good deals together.
And I'll add to that, my last word is it's good for the local economy. Because when we keep these businesses open, we keep jobs open and we help people maintain what can be generational wealth, maintain stability in our local economy. How many companies that we've sold are still in business that keep people employed, keep things happening. Companies I even call for services at my house sometimes, like, hey, we helped sell your company 5 years ago. I need a new HVAC or I need a new, hot water heater at my house. Like, it's good to know those places are still in good hands and people are happy. And that matters. And especially in all these turbulent times, even more so when you can be local and help local, it feels great. So on that note, everybody out there, we appreciate you listening. Always comment, like, subscribe. Let us know what we can talk about next time. And stay tuned next week for our very special guest, George Wilmer, on the podcast. And until then, I'm Brandon Bourgeois. That's Chris Sater, and we will see you later on the Steps to Soul podcast.